Aisha Carter had learned how to move through the world without being seen. As a black woman working the night shift as a janitor in one of the tallest corporate buildings downtown, invisibility wasn't a choice, it was survival. People passed her during the day without eye contact, stepping around her mop bucket as if she were part of the furniture. At night, when the offices emptied and the city slept, the silence wrapped around her like a second skin. At 32, Aisha carried more weight than her slim frame suggested. Once, she had dreamed of becoming an architect. She used to sketch buildings in the margins of her notebooks, imagining structures that reached toward the sky like declarations of hope. But life had a way of bending dreams until they broke. A violent relationship she barely escaped, medical bills that swallowed her savings, and a system that offered little mercy to those who stumbled had forced her into survival mode. Still, she showed up every night. That evening felt different from the start. The air inside the building was tense, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Aisha pushed her cart past rows of darkened offices, the city lights flickering like distant stars through the glass. Her headphones were off. She'd learned long ago that awareness could be the difference between safety and danger. As she neared the executive floor, she heard it. A thud. Then another, closer this time. Her heart skipped as she rounded the corner near the elevators. A man lay sprawled on the marble floor, his expensive suit darkened with blood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably important. Panic flashed through her mind, but her feet moved before fear could stop them. "Oh, God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. The man's breathing was shallow, uneven. Aisha tore off her jacket, pressing it against his side where the blood flowed freely. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. Years of hardship had taught her how to stay calm when everything felt like it was falling apart. "Stay with me," she said firmly. "You hear me. Don't close your eyes." His eyelids fluttered. His gaze struggled to focus on her face, as if he were trying to memorize it. "They're going to lie," he rasped, his fingers tightening weakly around her wrist. "Don't let them—" His grip loosened, his head rolling to the side. Aisha shouted for help, her voice echoing down the empty hall. Security guards came running. Someone called an ambulance. Red and blue lights soon painted the glass walls outside, turning the night into chaos. As medics lifted the man onto a stretcher, Aisha stepped back, her hands stained with blood that wasn't hers. No one thanked her, no one asked her name, but as she stood there, shaking, a strange feeling settled in her chest, an unexplainable sense that her life had just crossed a point of no return. She didn't know it yet, but saving that man would cost her everything. If this story hooked you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will change everything. Aisha didn't sleep that night. Even after the police finished questioning her and finally let her go, the image of the bleeding man on the marble floor replayed in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt his fingers tightening around her wrist, heard his broken whisper warning her about lies. She didn't understand what he meant, but the words clung to her like a shadow. By morning, the city already had a story. Aisha found out when she turned on the television in her tiny apartment, hoping for some reassurance that the man had survived. Instead, her breath caught in her throat as her own face stared back at her from the screen. "Tech CEO stabbed in corporate tower, janitor questioned," the headline read. They showed the building, the executive floor, then her name. The man was identified as Malik Johnson, a powerful and influential black tech entrepreneur known for multi-million-dollar contracts and political connections. Reporters spoke in low, dramatic voices, speculating about motives, about access, about how Aisha had been alone with him when security arrived. No one mentioned that she had tried to save his life. Her phone buzzed nonstop, unknown numbers, angry messages, even threats. By the time she arrived at work that evening, whispers followed her down the hallway. Her supervisor wouldn't meet her eyes. "We're placing you on indefinite leave," he said stiffly. "The company doesn't want any complications." Complications. That was what her integrity had become. 2 days later, the police came back. This time, they didn't ask questions. They read her rights. Aisha sat in a cold interrogation room under harsh white lights while detectives slid grainy still images across the table. Security footage, conveniently blurry, showed her near Malik moments before he collapsed. One officer leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already convinced. "You were the last person with him," he said. "You had access, you had opportunity." "I was helping him. He was bleeding. He would have died." They exchanged looks that said they'd already made their minds. Malik was still unconscious, the doctors said, unable to confirm her story, unable to defend her. By the end of the week, Aisha was charged. The courtroom felt smaller than her apartment, yet far more suffocating. Her public defender skimmed her file like it was an inconvenience. The prosecutor spoke confidently, weaving a narrative that painted her as resentful, desperate, and dangerous. As the judge set a trial date, Aisha's knees went weak. She searched the room for a single friendly face. There was none. When they led her away in handcuffs, the echo of Malik's warning rang in her ears again. They're going to lie. And for the first time in her life, Aisha understood something terrifying. The truth didn't matter nearly as much as power did. Don't miss the next happened where Aisha's fight for survival truly begins. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel to stay with the story. The sound of the cell door closing was louder than Aisha expected. It wasn't just metal slamming into metal. It was final, heavy, like the world had decided she no longer belonged to it. The concrete walls smelled of bleach and despair, and the narrow bunk felt colder than anything she had ever touched. As she sat there in her issued uniform, Aisha realized something that made her chest ache more than fear ever could. No one was coming to save her. The trial moved fast, too fast. Security footage malfunctioned. Witnesses contradicted themselves but were never questioned. And Malik Johnson, the only man who could confirm the truth, remained unconscious, his silence louder than any lie spoken in court. When the guilty verdict came, Aisha didn't cry. The tears refused to fall, as if her body knew they wouldn't change anything. She stood still while the judge read her sentence, the words floating above her like they belonged to someone else. Years in prison. As she was led away, Aisha felt something inside her harden, not into hatred, but resolve. Prison was not what movies made it look like. It was quieter, slower, more brutal in its routine. Days blended together, marked by count times, bland meals, and eyes that constantly measured weakness. At first, Aisha kept to herself, shrinking into the corners the way she had learned to do her whole life. But something unexpected happened. Other women noticed her calm. They came to her with questions about letters, about appeals, about paperwork they didn't understand. Aisha had no legal training, but she listened, she read, she asked the right questions. Soon, nights were spent hunched over law books borrowed from the prison library, her finger tracing words that suddenly felt like weapons. The system that had crushed her had rules, and rules could be learned. Months turned into years. Aisha became someone people sought out, not avoided. She helped a woman reunite with her children, helped another uncover a filing error that shaved years off a sentence. Each small victory stitched something back together inside her. Then, one rainy afternoon, a guard called her name. "You've got a visitor." Aisha's heart pounded as she entered the small visiting room, unsure of what or who she'd see. Instead, a legal aid attorney sat waiting, a folder thick with documents in front of him. "There's been a development in your case," he said. "A backup server, a missing video file, footage that had never been presented in court. It showed everything: the attacker, the struggle, Aisha rushing forward, not to harm, but to help. 3 weeks later, her conviction was overturned. Walking out of the prison gates, the sun felt too bright, the air too free. Aisha was no longer the woman who had entered those walls years ago. They had taken her freedom, but they had given her purpose. Reveals the man who wakes up and the truth he can no longer ignore. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. When Malik Johnson finally opened his eyes, the world felt unfamiliar. White ceilings, the steady beep of machines, a dull ache pulsing through his side. Doctors spoke in calm, careful voices, explaining how close he had come to death, how long he had been unconscious, how lucky he was to be alive. Malik listened, but his mind kept drifting to fragments, blurred images that refused to settle. A woman's face, warm hands pressing against his wound, a voice whispering words that felt like prayer. "Who saved me?" he asked hoarsely. The room went quiet. His assistant exchanged an uneasy look with the doctor before answering, "A janitor found you, but there were complications." As Malik regained strength, the truth came out piece by piece: the stabbing, the investigation, the trial, and finally the name he had been searching for without realizing it: Aisha Carter. Malik felt something twist painfully in his chest, worse than the wound that had nearly killed him. She had saved his life, and while he slept, the system he benefited from had destroyed hers. "She went to prison?" he asked, his voice sharp now. "Yes," his assistant admitted, "but she was released. The conviction was overturned." Released, as if that erased years stolen from her life. Malik ordered a full review of everything: security footage, internal reports, police cooperation. What he found made his hands shake with anger. Evidence ignored, convenient malfunctions, people protecting their own interests while an innocent woman paid the price. For the first time in his career, Malik shut down his company for a day. "I'm not doing business as usual," he told the board, "not when my life was bought with someone else's suffering." He searched for Aisha himself. No public announcement, no press, just a quiet, determined effort to find the woman whose face still visited him in dreams. He found her weeks later in a small diner on the edge of the city. She was wiping down tables, her posture straight but tired, wearing a faded uniform that felt painfully familiar. When Malik walked in, conversation slowed. People noticed him immediately. Aisha did not. Not until he spoke her name. She froze. Slowly, she turned to face him. Recognition flickered across her eyes. Not awe, not relief, but caution, the kind earned through betrayal. "I owe you my life," Malik said softly. Aisha studied him for a long moment before replying, "You already paid for it, just not with your own freedom." The words cut deeper than any accusation. Malik tried to apologize, to explain how sorry he was, how he hadn't known, but Aisha raised a hand. "I didn't save you to be thanked. I saved you because it was right. What happened after, that was the world reminding me where it thinks I belong." She turned back to her work, conversation over. Malik stood there, humbled. He realized then that money couldn't fix this. Apologies weren't enough. What Aisha needed wasn't sympathy. It was justice. Malik makes a choice that will change both their lives and challenge a system built on silence. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. Malik Johnson had the kind of power most people only read about in magazines. Boardrooms bent to his decisions, cities knew his name, and wealth flowed through him like a river with no end. But standing in that small diner, watching Aisha wipe a counter with steady hands, he felt powerless. Money couldn't erase the years stolen from her. Influence couldn't undo the humiliation, the fear, the injustice. And apologies? They sounded hollow compared to the life she'd lost. "I want to help," he said again, his voice quiet but firm. Aisha didn't look up. She had heard promises before, people offering money, influence, or favors, but those were never hers to claim. She paused, finally meeting his gaze. There was no anger this time, no tears, just a quiet, unshakable strength. "I don't need your help," she said, "and I don't need your charity. If you're here to give me money or public apologies, leave. That's not healing, that's pity." Malik swallowed hard. He had expected resistance, but not this honesty. Most people were grateful or afraid. She was neither. Her refusal humbled him. For the first time in years, he realized that real power wasn't in wealth or connections. Real power was in integrity, and she had it in abundance. "I didn't come here for that," he said. "I want to fix what I can, not for me, but for you, and for others like you." Aisha studied him, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "You can't fix the past, and don't think you can fix me." "I don't want to fix you," Malik admitted. "I want to change the system that almost destroyed you. You shouldn't have suffered alone, and others shouldn't have to either." For the first time in months, Aisha felt a flicker of curiosity. He wasn't offering empty words, he was offering action, a chance to turn something terrible into something meaningful. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave her a spark of purpose she hadn't felt in years. "What are you thinking?" she asked cautiously. "A foundation," Malik said, a determined glint in his eye. "Legal support for people wrongly accused, mentorship for those the system ignores, resources for those who have been crushed by injustice. And I want you to lead it with me, not behind me, beside me." Aisha felt her heart race, not from excitement, but from wariness. Leadership meant exposure, responsibility, and trust. But perhaps this was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a way to turn her suffering into something larger than herself. She considered the possibilities, she considered the risk, and then she nodded softly. "All right," she said softly, "but know this, I don't forgive easily, and I don't forget. If you're serious, we do this my way, not yours." Malik smiled, a real smile filled with relief and respect. "Agreed, your rules." For the first time, the balance of power between them was equal. He had influence and resources, yes, but she had the strength, vision, and courage to make real change. Together, they could challenge a system that had failed her and countless others, but neither of them knew just how dangerous that path would become. Reveals the bold steps they take to fight injustice and the enemies they make along the way. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. The Carter-Johnson Initiative wasn't just an idea, it was a revolution in motion. Within weeks, Aisha and Malik had assembled a team of lawyers, activists, and former inmates, all committed to one purpose: fight the injustice that had nearly destroyed Aisha's life. They weren't subtle about it, they weren't polite, they were determined, and that made the powerful nervous. The first case they took was emblematic of the system's failures. A young black man, accused of a crime he didn't commit, languished in jail while evidence had been conveniently lost. Aisha pored over files, noticing patterns, inconsistencies, and lies. Malik used his influence to push for a reinvestigation. Within days, the charges were dropped. Headlines didn't make her a hero, they barely mentioned her, but the victory mattered, and word began to spread. People started to notice that the initiative wasn't just symbolic, it was effective. High-profile attorneys, politicians, and corporate figures began whispering about it in boardrooms and private meetings. Some feared it, some admired it, but all knew it could not be ignored. Threats came soon after. Anonymous calls, letters with veiled warnings. One morning, Malik's office discovered a suspicious package on the doorstep, clearly meant to intimidate, but harmless.
Aisha remained calm, unaffected. She had faced fear before. This was just another obstacle. People in power hate change, she told Malik one evening as they reviewed case files. They don't care if it's right, they care if it threatens them. Malik nodded. And we're threatening them. That's why we have to be smart. The initiative wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about fame. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made the elite. Each case they won became a message. The system could no longer silence the powerless. But with influence came scrutiny. Aisha learned to navigate press conferences, interviews, and political maneuvering. Malik had to step back from some public appearances to avoid overshadowing her. Slowly, they were building something bigger than themselves, a network that could fight corruption and injustice at its roots. Yet, despite the victories, there were moments of quiet fear. Every time a door banged in the office late at night or a call came from an unknown number, Aisha felt the weight of the enemies they were making. But she refused to waver. Each challenge reinforced what she had learned in prison. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. The initiative had grown from an idea into a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time, Aisha didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful, not because of money or status, but because she was making a difference in lives that the world had long ignored. Malik watched her from across the room, pride evident in his eyes. He had wealth and influence, but it was her determination, her unshakable will that truly changed everything. And that's when the threats escalated. This time, more direct, more dangerous, signaling that not everyone was ready to see the powerless rise. The Carter-Johnson initiative had grown faster than either Aisha or Johnson had imagined. Every victory came with a cost: long nights, tense negotiations, and enemies who lurked just beyond the spotlight. But amidst the chaos, something neither of them expected began to bloom: a quiet, unspoken bond. It started with small gestures. Johnson would bring her coffee during late-night strategy sessions, careful not to make it seem like charity. Aisha would notice the subtle way he listened when she spoke, how he respected her ideas without interruption, without trying to take the spotlight. They shared laughter over silly mistakes in presentations and quiet sighs when frustrations mounted. In a world that had tried to break them both, they found solace in each other's presence. But both knew better than to act too quickly. Aisha's past had taught her caution, patience, and skepticism. Trust was earned, not given. Johnson had built empires, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and faced betrayal from board members, colleagues, and even family. They were wary of blurring the lines between professional respect and personal feelings. One evening, after a particularly challenging press conference where the initiative had exposed corruption in the police department, Aisha and Johnson stayed behind in the office. The city lights painted the room in soft gold, a stark contrast to the harsh realities they fought against daily. "You know," Johnson began, leaning back in his chair, "I never expected to find this." He gestured vaguely between them. "Someone I can trust, who challenges me, who doesn't let me control the story. Someone who reminds me why we do this." Aisha looked up from her notes, her eyes meeting his. She didn't smile immediately. Instead, she studied him, measuring sincerity in the silence. "I didn't save you to be admired," she said softly, "and I didn't step into this to be depended on. But I'm learning that maybe having someone who sees you, truly sees you, isn't so bad." Johnson felt a weight lift from his chest. "I've learned the same," he admitted. "It's terrifying, isn't it, to let someone in after everything we've both survived?" Aisha nodded. "It is, but maybe that's exactly why it matters." The city outside continued to hum with life, unaware of the quiet moment happening in an office high above. Neither spoke for a while, but the tension was not uncomfortable. It was hopeful, like two souls recognizing a truth they had tried to ignore. Later, Johnson asked the question neither wanted to rush into. "Do you believe in love again?" Aisha paused. The weight of her past whispered caution, but her heart whispered possibility. "I'm learning," she said finally, a small, genuine smile breaking through. It was enough to know that their bond had shifted from mere alliance to something deeper, something neither had planned, but both needed. The world outside remained dangerous. Their enemies hadn't gone away. But for a moment, amidst the battles and the chaos, Aisha and Malik found something that could withstand it all: trust, respect, and the fragile beginnings of love. Brings the story to a breathtaking conclusion where courage, justice, and love collide. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the epic finale.
5 years had passed since Aisha Carter had walked out of prison, free but forever changed. In that time, she had transformed her pain into power, her injustice into action. The Carter-Johnson Initiative had grown into a national movement, helping hundreds of people who had been wronged by a system that often turned a blind eye to the powerless. Tonight, Aisha stood on a stage in a packed auditorium. Thousands of people filled the seats, their eyes fixed on her. The air buzzed with anticipation. For years, she had worked quietly behind the scenes, correcting wrongs, mentoring young women, advocating for those whose voices had been silenced. But tonight, the spotlight was hers. She looked out at the crowd, faces filled with hope, with gratitude, with determination to fight for justice. For the first time, Aisha felt seen, not as a janitor, not as a victim, but as a leader, a fighter, a symbol of resilience. Malik Johnson stood off to the side, his presence steady and supportive. He had watched her rise, not with pride for having helped her, but with awe for her courage, her intelligence, and her relentless drive to make the world better. Together, they had faced threats, corruption, and betrayal, and they had survived. Aisha took a deep breath, stepping to the microphone. 5 years ago, I was invisible, she began, her voice strong, resonant. I was overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. But invisibility is a choice only others make for you until you decide to claim your own power. The audience erupted in applause. She paused, letting the energy wash over her. Her journey hadn't been easy. It had been full of pain, fear, and moments where giving up felt like the only option. But every time she had faced the impossible, she remembered why she couldn't stop. She wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had been silenced, dismissed, or ignored. Power isn't wealth, Aisha continued. It isn't influence or status. Power is courage. Power is standing up when the world tells you to stay down. Power is using your voice when you've been told it doesn't matter. And today, I am proof that no one can decide your worth but you. As she finished, the applause thundered through the auditorium. Tears filled some eyes, hope filled others, and inspiration hung heavy in the room. Malik stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. No words were needed. The bond between them spoke louder than anything else, a bond forged through struggle, resilience, and love. Aisha smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt the world truly see her. She wasn't invisible, she was unstoppable. And she knew that her story was only the beginning, not just for her, but for everyone who would follow her lead. The journey from victim to victor, from invisible to unstoppable, was complete. But the fight for justice continued, and now she would lead it with courage, with heart, and with everyone who believed that change was possible. Thank you for following Aisha's incredible journey. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing, inspiring stories that show courage, justice, and hope.